TE Talks with Guides is a weekly podcast for lovers of history, travel, and all things Italian.
Hi, Federica. How are you?
I'm fine. What about you?
I'm doing okay. I just finished celebrating Easter, and as you can see from my face, I've been eating a lot of food.
Oh, you look great.
Listen, so thank you very much for being available today. And
thank you for asking me.
It's kind of weird. I wanted to take this opportunity and finally, with Zoom, and since we all have time to do this, I wanted to start setting up a series of talks with a lot of the guides who work with Through Eternity. Many of you guys have been working with us many years, and as I'm also a guide myself, I find that we have these fascinating discussions between us. And I thought, I think this would be very interesting for people who have toured with us before, and maybe people who are interested in touring with us, that they could, find it an interesting and worthwhile discussion to listen to on a podcast or on a video with Zoom, and hear what we like to talk about, right? So if you don't mind, can you tell me how many years have you been working with Through Eternity Tours?
It's been 7 years now.
Wow, 7 years.
Yeah, time flies.
Time does certainly fly when you're having fun, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yes, and how long have you been an official guide of Rome?
Well, I actually got my license in 2010, but way before that, I had trained a little bit as a tour guide. I used to work for different companies, and I was a member of their educational services, So I have been doing tours for years, I guess 12, 13 years now. I had the chance to do tours with kids, and then, grown-ups, and the former president of Italy. So, yeah, I met many people in this way. Yeah.
Great. And you worked a lot at the Colosseum. And your specialty, besides being a guide, let everybody know what it is that you excelled at.
Well, I studied at University of Rome for 6 years, and my specialty is Italian Renaissance. So I don't need to tell you that I am absolutely in love with the Vatican museums and their amazing collection, and of course the main protagonists of the Vatican museums, and they are of course Michelangelo, Raphael, and the popes.
Of course, which are filled with a lot of wonderful stories that we all love to go and talk about when we are at the Vatican and going into wonderful places like the Raphael rooms. What's great about this is that we kind of have the liberty because when one comes to the Raphael rooms, they can be pretty crowded. So and it's towards the end of a tour and right before the Sistine Chapel. So in some ways they may get overlooked for a bit, or people are rushing through, because you can just put out a couple of things and then people are really ready to go see the Sistine Chapel. But now we have the luxury to talk about Raphael, right? Because it's an exciting time. Everyone last year was talking about Leonardo da Vinci because it was the 500th anniversary of his death. Well, that got me really excited because I knew that this was going to be this year was the 500th anniversary of the death of Raphael. As a very young man at the age of 37. And what was it? April 6, 1520?
April 6, yeah. And surprisingly, this is a very interesting and famous tradition. He died, unfortunately, on his birthday.
Sure.
So, yeah. So the same day that, gave us, one of the greatest artists of the Italian Renaissance was the same day that took him away from us. So it's very interesting and fascinating in a way.
Well, I'm going to ask you a very controversial question between guides sometimes, but I don't want you to answer it now because I think by how we're going to end our discussion, we'll be able to see the answer or know the answer to it. It is, a lot of guides in Rome, because as you brought up immediately, we talk about Michelangelo and we talk about Raphael because their work is everywhere in the city and more or less everyone else has kind of been influenced by them. But I think a lot of guides that I talk to tend to appreciate one more than the other. They either prefer Michelangelo or Raphael. And I don't want you to answer now, but let's say at the end of our discussion, let me see if I can tell which one you prefer or not. But, I think you actually may be so passionate. I think you may just think they're fantastic, both of them. But we'll figure it out.
Okay.
Okay.
They're like the yin and the yang in a way,
Yes, that is true.
They are so
Absolutely.
incredibly different, and their personalities are so contrasting, and that it's like asking me if I like more pizza or sushi. It's
completely different. That's right. They're just
yeah, definitely.
That is true. But one. Well, I guess we could always talk about that. Like one had an influence on the other, or maybe they influenced each other, because of their work and many other pieces. And, during our discussion, probably if we're going to bring up certain artwork, hopefully in the editing, what I'll be able to do is I'll be able to insert some of the images with this that we're going to talk about. But of course, you and I discussed this a little bit because you were very fortunate indeed before, this quarantine was enforcing everyone to stay at home. You got to see the largest exhibit in the world dedicated to Raphael, which is the temporary exhibit at the Scuderia, the Popes, and it's done by the city of Rome. So you got to see the exhibit. So tell us all about it. What did you think?
I was so incredibly excited, and I knew that something was going to happen. I mean, I could feel it in my bones that I was going to have just a few days or probably hours to visit it. And since this was probably the greatest event for us, the art historians and the tour guides, so I woke up very early that morning and just left my baby with my mother. I just did my makeup perfectly. I just had to wear this beautiful dress because I wanted to be very elegant to meet him.
Of course.
Raphael, of course. I mean, Raphael was very famous for being a very elegant and graceful person. So I had to be perfect. And I didn't have a reservation. So I had to line for something like a couple of hours before having the chance to go inside. Yeah, this is probably the main reason why they soon decided to just close the doors, because too many people, and even with reservation, and the rooms inside are pretty big, but there were so many incredible artworks that of course the rooms were absolutely jam-packed. And overall I can tell you that I'm so happy that I had the chance to see it and to visit it, because this is probably the most important exhibit ever dedicated to him. More than 200 artworks, and more than half of them created by Raphael himself. And it's a very interesting exhibit, in my opinion, because he goes back in time. This was a bit controversial, and because when we saw the first official posters of the exhibit, you could perfectly see his name, Raffaello, in big blocked letters, and then the date of his death before the date of his birth. And that was a clear sign that the organization of, the collection and the works was going to be different, new, more original in a way. So since this year we are celebrating the anniversary of his death, that was actually the starting point to start telling like a sort of beautiful flashback, going back to his origins, not just as a person, but as an artist. And I have to be honest, I was a bit in doubt at first, but then I had the chance to think about it and read about it. It kind of works.
Okay, so you read up on it before you came to the exhibit. You knew that it was going to be going backwards in time.
Yeah. Because you know what, it's fun. The art historian, they are usually named me the art hysterics. And I mean, in a way that, because we always so academic and serious sometimes. So when you see something so weird, so going back in time, so telling something that at the end of his career, before analyzing the beginning of his career, he could feel a bit weird, I have to be honest. So I had to study before going, and then when I was there, I had the idea, I saw the big picture, let's say. I think it works. I think it works because it is true that you go back in time, but each room has a main theme that is perfectly, developed, and it's pretty clear to be catched, I guess. Yeah.
That's really interesting to me because I think, first of all, I mean, having lived in Rome for over 20 years now, I can't think of, or even in New York City, of an exhibit with emphasizing one specific artist that they would go backwards. They always kind of want to talk about the progression of their artwork from the beginning. And it seems to me it's an exciting and very bold choice. For me, what I always love to do, because I do like to talk about Raphael a lot. Don't talk about him in the Raphael rooms when we go to the Vatican museums, when I take tours. I usually do it at the Pinacoteca, because one of my favorite rooms is the rooms of the Raphael tapestries and also the Transfiguration and 2 other altar pieces. And what I always love to talk about with Raphael, because even in the room before that, we have a Perugino, and we have a painting by his father, Giovanni Santi.
His father, yeah.
I love to talk about how his style evolved, or an artist working in a workshop and having a master like Perugino, and that how he was so good because he imitated the style of his master, but then he completely evolved and he learned from the other great masters of the time who were a bit older than him. Michelangelo and Da Vinci were around at the same time, so he's taking in what they have and then changing it and evolving. And in that room, it's a perfect expression of those, paintings where you have the different styles and his evolution. It's kind of amazing to think. And how other people were not always very good at imitating the manner of Michelangelo, let's say. But some could argue, because as you say, art historians get very passionate, and also guides. We all get very passionate about what we do, and we get very attached to the artwork. I find this a bold choice, and I'm kind of curious to see how. So it started out with, it's what's great in Rome is that you can go see a lot of these other pieces because they're not going to be bringing the Transfiguration, right? That's not.
No, of course.
So how did it start out with? What were the last pieces?
In the past, I actually worked for the Scuderia del Quirinale for, I think, 4 years, more or less. So I had the chance to do many tours in there. And for every different exhibit, the first room, the famous, Sala Uno, has always been for years a showstopper. So they give you, at the very beginning, something that feels like a slap in your face. And this time that was a punch in my face, because they had this incredible idea. I don't feel like I'm spoiling the surprise, because there's this beautiful video where you can actually see it on, it's on the official website of the Scuderia. So everyone knows now that you take your ticket, you leave your bags at the check room, you climb those beautiful stairs, and then you reach the first room, and you have this life-sized copy of the tomb of Raphael that you can see in the Pantheon where he was buried. Yeah, it's a life-size model. And it's incredible because, my brain was telling me, that this is not the real one, because that his tomb is in the Pantheon, okay? But my heart was telling me that probably they have found a way to have it in the first room in the Scuderia. It's incredible. That was really, really, really shocking. And if I have to be honest, I don't know if something like that, so sensational, was needed, because this is an exhibit about Raphael that is in Rome, and the Pantheon is not so far away from the Scuderia. And so probably, if you are in Rome, you probably want to go there and, leave a flower at his tomb, as a real tomb. But it's incredible because it's, believe me, if you feel like they actually sliced the tomb away from the Pantheon and just displayed it inside the Scuderia, it's amazing. So it's a very good start. It's a sort of shock. I told you, you feel like a punch in your face when you see it. It's amazing. Yeah, and this is even a very good thing, because I can see that in the past years, technology has been given such an incredible function, to help you in understanding and analyzing the career of these artists of the past. I think about what they did in the Domus Aurea, for example. We have tours for the Domus Aurea, and believe me, every time I go there and I get the chance to have that immersive experience, I always cry. It's something that, I mean, I have goosebumps if I think about it. And I had more or less
reality,
the same.
you're talking about when
With the music. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's beautiful. And so I appreciated the fact that they use technology in this way to move you all around the city of Rome, and you are at the Scuderie, but you feel like you are in the Pantheon. That was, of course, very important for Raphael himself. Wanted to be buried in the Pantheon, so he probably chose that specific church because everyone knows that was a temple. It is a church now, of course, because in my opinion, that was a way to pay a tribute to his love for the ancient Romans and, antiquities, and even a way to stress the importance that the ancient Romans had on his training as a painter and his career as a painter, I guess. So the first room is something like your jaw just drops. It's amazing, beautiful. And then I told you, so that is probably a very good way to think about his death, to remember what happened when Raphael died. And then you go back in time and you go to the second room where you can actually analyze the last months of his career and the last things that he actually created while in life.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So, it's kind of interesting how you're saying that. It's I love the idea of a provocation at the beginning, right? The photograph.
Yeah.
I also think it's when you bring it up, you're like, oh, I don't want to spoil things for people, but it's not a spoiler. I think because there's one thing when we're talking about doing things of virtual reality, or we're videotaping and discussing things, and of course we always know when we're on our tours and stuff, you can repeat information to people. Nothing compares to actually being there, right? Nothing compares.
Oh, of course.
To going in the space and then seeing it. So have at it. Describe everything you would like to it. Now, I know in the Scuderia, they kind of tend to have 2 floors to go through the journey. And so that's what they did, right? The first, second half of his life, and then the beginning of his life, right?
Yeah, exactly. So on the first floor, you have basically this very big room with this reproduction of his tomb. And then, of course, you analyze all the things that he created for the Pope Leo X, so the famous Medici Pope. And actually, on the first floor, the last room is dedicated to the amazing tapestries that have just been displayed in the Sistine Chapel just a few months ago. That was the end of February.
I've been stuck in London.
Yeah, of course. I did the same thing. I woke up very early in the morning and just rushed to the Vatican museums before everyone else. It was beautiful. And
I've always loved the tapestries. Now, have you been able to see the cartoons of the Raphael tapestries?
Yeah, in London.
The Victoria and Albert Museum in London.
Yeah, exactly. And since the cartoons are, of course, very delicate, it was impossible to take them to Rome for the exhibit. But again, technology helped us, even in this case. So they had a sort of huge, gigantic, life-size replica of one of the cartoons for the tapestries. Displayed right in front of the real tapestry coming from the Vatican museums. So that was, because, when people think about Raphael, he was a painter. Well, that is just a very small percentage of his personality as an artist, because he was an architect, an incredible architect, and he was involved in so many different things. He was a scenographer, so he worked for theaters, and he actually was pretty busy with the tapestries for the Sistine Chapel. So he had this incredible, brilliant talent. It was not just about the paintings. It was about art.
And so the exhibit also covered that as well. They kind of didn't just
that
he was a painter, but that he did work. He was also a restorationist. I mean, he was in charge of looking after the antiquities. He's probably had the first person in that role by a pope.
And in the exhibit, we have this beautiful letter that he wrote with this incredible intellectual. His name was Baldassarre Castiglione. So they addressed the letter to the Pope Leo X. And the letter is about a project they had, the project of making a sort of list, a sort of catalog of all the antiquities of Rome. And you can actually recognize three main parts in this letter. The first part of the letter is very important because it tells you about how Rome had been devastated by, not just by the barbarians, but even by the Romans themselves. This is something that makes me laugh a lot because sometimes I hear my colleagues blaming the barbarians, the stole, the columns. Well, nothing ish. The Romans had a very important, played a very important role in the destruction of the old Rome, So they destroyed the Rome of the emperors to build the Rome of the popes. And so, Raphael was in charge of taking care of the antiquities, and that is a very modern way to look after, the city. So, and even that specific element of his career is perfectly, represented in the exhibit.
You know what? I always love to hear, one of my favorite things with studying about Rome and its history, or in general about art and architecture, is the connections between things. I always love to talk about that on my tours. What I mean by that is, my amazement, because I didn't know it. The first time I went to the Victoria and Albert Museum, I finally saw Raphael's cartoons that were sent to have the Flemish tapestry makers make tapestries and weave the tapestry directly over them. And I never understood. And, there's this whole story about how that ends up to be the property of the Queen of England. But there is that connection. Or also, one tends to think of the Renaissance and an artist. Many people don't realize when they come to Rome how indeed it's connected to the ancient world. And that, Raphael had this immense job of trying to catalog everything. Or how did we look at stuff in the ancient world in a certain context? In the Renaissance time, you have, or at least, I kind of simplify things, but you have people who are very wealthy families building enormous palaces. And for them, in their little area of tranquility would be the courtyard on the inside, because the outside where the streets were dirty and filled with carriages and chaotic or whatever. And so they wanted to go on treasure hunts. They would have beautiful statues that they were digging up wherever they wanted to decorate them, right?
Yeah, exactly. And for example, Raphael was deeply involved in the construction of one of these big palaces of the Renaissance. There was a sort of, copy of the ancient Roman villas with, gardens and beautiful statues displayed. If you think about what he did for Agostino Chigi, there was this super incredible rich banker from Siena that moved to Rome and just decided to create this amazing villa. There was a perfect copy of the ancient Roman villas, but with this kind of Renaissance touch. And so just imagine, nature and gardens and then statues that in Rome can be found everywhere. Usually we say that Rome is a lasagna, if you know what I mean. So it's made of different layers, and every time you just dig and you scratch the surface, you have something that just pops out. And Raphael was completely immersed in this kind of contest. So for example, the third room of the exhibit is completely dedicated to the incredible role that the antiquities had on the inspiration that Raphael took from the ancient Romans. Think about, for example, you were talking about courtyards with statues. Think about the most famous one, the famous Cortile Ottagono that now we have in the Vatican, the octagonal courtyard of the museum.
Sure, because the Pope was the king, so he's going to have the best courtyard of them all, right?
Oh, of course. So when you go there, if you had the chance to go there in the 1500s, you actually had the best of the ancient world displayed all together in just a few square meters. And think about how extraordinary the Apollo, for example, displayed in the courtyard was for Raphael as a sort of inspiration. But even the Laocoon, with his incredible face, with his, expression that tells you so much about the pain he's feeling in that moment, something that looks so different from Raphael's aesthetic. Well, even in that case, that was a very important source of inspiration for Raphael. So it's like what you were saying before. He had many sources of inspiration, and he took the best from all of them, and he combined them in his own aesthetic. This is probably the reason why it was so great. You can always recognize the source of inspiration, but it's never just copying. It's taking the essence and, giving a personal reinterpretation of the things. This is probably the reason why I love him so much.
Yeah, exactly. He's able to reinterpret or improve or make it truly his own, or maybe even have that person see what he's done and recognize that themselves and say, oh, okay, wow, he really took it to a different level or a new level. Quite an amazing life that he's had, since he only lived for 37 years.
Yeah, in fact.
So did they talk about, you're referring to the little villa, the Romanized villa by, sponsored by Agostino Chigi, the banker, which ended up in another family's hands. And so that's called the Villa Farnesina. But did they also talk about Villa Madama, the one for Pope Clement?
Yeah, the one, exactly. Yeah, there's an entire section dedicated to Raphael as an architect. And we know that this is another tradition that Vasari told us about Raphael coming to Rome because he had been recommended to the Pope by Donato Bramante. There was this great architect that in those years was working for the construction of the new St. Peter's Basilica. So he was the official architect of St. Peter's. And when he died, in a very surprising way, his office was actually entrusted and given to Raphael. So young, not so experienced with architecture, and he became the official architect of the Pope. And he was chosen for different commissions. He was really involved from this point of view by the Chigi family. So he worked as an architect in different occasions for Agostino Chigi. And there's even a little section of the exhibit dedicated to this incredible villa that was never completed. I had the privilege and the honor of studying at university with Christoph Frommel, that is probably the most famous, historian of architecture of the Renaissance. And I remember going there with him and visiting Villa Madama, which is very, very, very difficult because you need a very important permission. And I remember actually making this, trying to see how what we have of that villa is still reflecting the original idea of Raphael. It had to be a sort of miracle on earth, a huge, big complex with gardens and courtyards and fountains and two different apartments, the summer one and the winter one. And in the exhibit, you don't get probably the complexity of the whole project. But I'm very happy that even this specific part of his career is present and well represented.
Yeah, so you've been able, I have not yet been able to get to Villa Madonna, but I always
it's beautiful, my God.
I always love to save these things, because, I always know that I'll never be able to see everything in Rome, but that is one of the few major things that I have yet to see is the Villa Madama.
You want to know what?
What?
I went there twice.
You did? Of course you have.
Yeah.
And I bet because your husband works in the Vatican museums, you get to see all the special places in the Vatican. Wait, have you gone to see this, come si chiama? What is the name of it? The passageway, not with the calendar, not the calendar, excuse me, the scenes of the Bible in the ceiling.
Loggia.
The Loggia, Raphael, thank you. Yes.
I've been there.
Of course you have, right?
Yeah, but that was not my husband's responsibility. My professor Frommel took me there.
Well, there we go. Of course, because he's going to get the connections to get to see it.
Yeah.
Well, so we've discussed a bit about his artwork and Raphael as an architect. What else did they address that you found interesting that was noteworthy in the exhibit?
Well, there's a very interesting section. It's actually when you climb the steps to reach the second floor and you visit the first room of the second floor, there's an entire room dedicated to women. That is another very interesting aspect of, this is the main difference, I guess, between Michelangelo and Raphael.
Yes. Well, there's a lot of things that we could talk about with that. as guides, we all kind of like develop our own opinions on these things, or when we study this stuff, we always read about historians, and they all have sometimes conflicting opinions or different opinions. But that sounds like, so they're getting into the personality of Raphael. So if many of you don't know, I mean, and correct me if I'm wrong, or you can add on to, I've always read about him as being a kind of a dandy, meaning, a well-dressed, handsome, young man with his hair, toward the length of his shoulders. And he got along really well with people. People liked him. I imagine him to have been extremely charismatic, that he had an entourage with him, that many artists worked with him. And he was a very big contrast to Michelangelo, who was a bit of a curmudgeon, who was, implied that he had what do they describe the word? Michelangelo had a terribilità, which
very good.
Translate terribility is not a word in English, but, a man who did not suffer fools, and so when Leo X became Pope after Julius II, Leo X was of the Medici family, who grew up with Michelangelo at his home because his father had brought him in to live with the children.
Yeah.
And he said, it's great, Michelangelo, I'm Pope now, so I'm going to send you off to Florence to do work for me. Because he said he's like just so hard to deal with. But he then used Raphael for so many different things. So we get this impression that he was very gracious, that he worked well with people, that people, could get work from him. Maybe that detracted from some of his work. I feel like when his students got involved, they weren't necessarily up to his level. But then we also talk about the fact that he was quite a ladies' man. So you're saying in that room they talked about the ladies. There's a famous baker's daughter, the Fornarina.
Yeah.
What other ladies were there that they were talking about?
Well, that's my favorite one, the famous Velata.
Mm-hmm.
That we don't know if she is a different woman, since both the Fornarina's face and the Velata's face, they look so similar, and it's pretty debated. We don't know. This is very interesting, that the mystery, beyond the identity of these women, they look alike, but we don't know exactly who they were, and we don't know so much about their life. Even the Fornarina, lately, this kind of identification has been discussed. And but they look beautiful. They're amazing with their penetrating eyes. They kind of invite you to approach them, but then the position of their hands, shielding their, womanhood, kind of keeps you away from them. It's beautiful. I mean, they're amazing, and you can tell that he was the type of guy that really loved women, and probably he had the chance to see many of them in, a beautiful way. Can I say that?
You can always tell, I always wonder if Michelangelo ever really saw a naked woman, because sometimes his naked women, in the Sistine Chapel, he perceived how a woman's breasts were, as if they were the same way they were pushed up in the dresses, that they stayed that way. Obviously, I don't think he's ever got to see a naked woman, but it's kind of wonderful when you do see that there are men in this world that really, really love women, and with the talent, the mastery of Raphael, he's painting them.
Or for example, think about the most beautiful woman that Michelangelo ever portrayed. I mean, think about the Pietà that we have in St. Peter's Basilica. Her face is amazing, but you see her drowning in that dress, so you don't have an idea of what she looks like. I mean, she could be really, really fat or really, really thin. You don't know, because the dress is creating this huge, big structure that is hiding her.
So it's lucky lady. She never gained weight in her face.
It's like he took a face and just put it on the body. That's of course, there's a metaphor in the Mother Church and the Virgin, but you can tell that Raphael was really interested in this specific subject, and the Velata portrait with this beautiful woman with this amazing dress, that it's just one of the most beautiful things I have ever seen in my entire life.
Wasn't it also in the Fornarina that they were finding out that they rediscovered in a restoration, or there was somebody else, I remember, that they were saying that there was a ring on her finger? As if he had...
there was, but the ring was kind of eliminated a little bit. And but there's something that is very interesting in the Fornarina portrait, which is the bracelet she is wearing around her arm.
Sure.
With the signature of Raphael. Yeah, that it seems like a sort of seal. She's mine.
Seal of property, I guess. Wow.
Yeah, yeah. Exactly.
And so what about after the other rooms? How would you say then, because we don't want to talk about every single room in there, but how would you say that it concluded, and what was your kind of take on the whole thing?
Let's say that the last room, of course, since you have the artworks that he made during his first part of his life and his career, are probably less exciting than the ones that are displayed in the other rooms. But there's a very interesting and exciting artwork, which is his portrait. That is probably the most famous portrait of Raphael. So this very young boy with this very beautiful, gentle face and beardless. It's very, very similar to the portrait, to the self-portrait that we have in the room of the signature in the Vatican museums. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that is the first. And this is interesting to see the difference between this first self-portrait and probably the last self-portrait that Raphael painted, which is, I have it here. Look.
There we go.
So yeah, this is one of his last, paintings. And you can tell that his face looks a bit different.
It does.
The beard, his face is less gracious, a bit chubby, a little bit. This was probably painted a few months before his death. And that is another very interesting, subject that we should analyze, I guess. I mean, how did he die? Why did he die when he was so young? And what happened? It's really debated. And that face can tell you probably that he was probably working too much. Who knows? Sure. The conditions were absolutely raining on him. And it kind of seems like the person that couldn't say no to his patrons, Sure. And he was constantly accepting works and, why not? Yeah, I'll do it. And that was definitely too much, I guess.
That's a major question, when one waxes poetic like I do on my tours, they always want to understand and how did Raphael die? Did he contract venereal diseases? Was he overworked? Giorgio Vasari, the painter, and of course the writer of the world about considered the first art historian, right? The lives of artists. He says that when Raphael died, he was finishing up the Transfiguration, that there were earth tremors throughout the city of Rome, and that they had this amazing city of processionals. They had a processional for Raphael, and that the painting followed him. That he was buried, of course, in the Pantheon. And as you tell me that the exhibit started out with a photograph of the tomb, it's kind of nice for us to conclude our little discussion by talking about that he was brought there to be buried, let alone the fact that they lost his bones for a few centuries and then they rediscovered it right in the 1800s. I think they discovered it again. Well, Federica, I don't know, is there anything else you'd like to add that you think people should know about with the exhibit?
Well, the exhibit I told you is very important because for the first time ever, you have the chance to see so many incredible artworks created by Raphael. And I don't know if they are going to keep it open for, even after June the 2nd. There should be, the date of the end of it. I don't know if it will be reopened to the public. I don't know. I really hope so. But
I hope so too. I think they will. They must,
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's a crime not letting people
of course, exactly.
You know what? Sometimes during the night, it may sound stupid, but I wake up and I think about those poor paintings displayed in those empty rooms, and I feel so sad. And I really hope that they are going to reopen, as soon as possible. And for the people that will have the chance to go and visit it, my suggestion is you go there first. You learn everything about his career, and then take your time and take your chance to visit all the amazing places in Rome where you can find more artworks, the Vatican museums, the Villa Farnesina, that is amazing. Try to find a way to visit Villa Madama, which is impossible. But go to Santa Maria del Popolo, St. Mary of the People, where you have the amazing Chigi Chapel. That is an incredible masterpiece. So that would be the best way to analyze such an incredible artist that had such an incredible and short life, unfortunately, and such an incredible and productive career.
Yeah, I know. It's an amazing opportunity, I think, for people, because we can think about the fact is that, as we said, this exhibit has more of his artwork than any other exhibit ever dedicated to Raphael.
Yeah.
But it gives one a unique opportunity, because not only do you have that as an exhibit, but the city of Rome itself is a place that has more of his artwork than any other city in the world, I'm pretty certain, and his greatest masterpieces. And in the context of where he intended many things to be, which is wonderful. Federica, I thank you so much for being
thank you.
available. What I always love to talk about is making connections with people and, sharing feelings and stuff like that, because, it's a perfect thing that I love about you is how you talk about feeling sad for the artwork with nobody going through to see them. But I choose to be positive about this. I think that artwork is going to be just taking a moment to relax, and they know that we will all be coming back and going into enjoying this exhibit sooner than we think, right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And I look forward to seeing you as soon as possible, and to give you a hug when I see you.
Oh, yeah. I miss you too.
Okay, Federica.
I hope to see you very, very soon. And thank you for calling me. It was a very big pleasure for me.
For me as well. Ciao, carissima.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Thank you for listening to our TE Talks with Guides. We have a new episode every Wednesday. Please subscribe to get an alert when each podcast comes out. Rate us and tell people how you enjoyed it, and share it on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter. Most importantly, if you enjoyed it, send us a feedback about the show. Also, if you are curious about what some of these people and places we talked about look like, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel and watch the video on this podcast, where we have inserted special images for you to further enjoy the story.